So don't be blinded.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to do my best.
Stand to the side just briefly. Let me get back to the PowerPoint here. There we go. Okay. So just briefly.
Hello, my name is Myriam Chancy. I'm the HBA Chair of the Humanities at Scripps College, and I'm a specialist in Caribbean women's literature and also a novelist.
Okay.
I'll be speaking today about the relationship
Wi-Fi.
between my novel What Storm, What Thunder, which is on the 2010 Haiti earthquake, and Mirlan Constance, a beautiful mural on Janvier 12, 2010.
So I will pause it there. We can move forward with our panelists. John, if you want to dim the projector so we don't blind our panelists. So what we mean by expanding media is resources beyond the original and related video interviews. The goal is to identify what additional resources would be most helpful for faculty. So for example, texts, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, archival resources, documentaries, other objects, performances, etc. So what do we have now? We have largely videos around one object. What are other possibilities? We want to really turn it over to all of you. First, introduce yourselves if you wouldn't mind, and then we want to think about a little bit of how this would incorporate into your classrooms, and what do you think would be helpful in doing so? And we have I think we'll try this one, and I'll turn this one on, so we have to.
Okay. Well, my name is Shayla Metzger. I'm head of preservation and conservation for the UCLA Library. I have been brought in, as I see here, to talk about integration of conservation science information with teaching. I will confess right now, I don't have a teaching role in the university formally at all, though I do a lot of mentoring of young conservators. But I go to a lot of exhibits where I visited digital sites where you see conservation science information integrated. And I actually might expand the idea of conservation science to material culture in general. Like, what is this made out of? And how was it made? And those are questions, basic questions I think people have. And digital platforms are great platforms to play with that. So, and I'll pass it on.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiffany Barber. I'm assistant professor of African American art here in the Department of Art History. I have had the pleasure to teach with the Merlin Constant exhibition when it was here last spring. Like math, yes, I think that's right. And really it was part of a graduate seminar that I was teaching on the intellectual history of Black art and aesthetics. And the students did a kind of like performative lecture walkthrough, curatorial walkthrough in their own interpretation of the objects, using some of the source material from our class and then the artworks that were on display as part of the symposium that many of the folks who were featured in the module for the Merlin Constant artwork were a part of. So I wanted to echo the what Chela said about materiality. I don't know how to do this, but I would love to figure out how to engage students in the kind of materiality of the object, the texture of it, because the digital is so much, it can be a kind of like, it's an interface, like, I'm just looking at this thing, I'm a passive looker. And the way I teach is very different with my students to make them active, close lookers. So, and then the other thing I would say is I don't know what the possibilities are, but maybe student-led, student-generated content. Because I'm finding in my undergraduate classes, I'm trying to figure out how to do some assessments that are about like their everyday life, like the kinds of media that they encounter and making art history real for them in those ways. And as also kind of like outlining like this is a career path you could take. So you could be a director of interpretation at a museum and you could bring these kinds of exercises that we did in class as part of your portfolio to job interviews. So creating content that is also art historically based and that's really rich for them. So
Hey everyone, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Nathaniel. I'm a lecturer in World Arts and Cultures Dance. I've worked with Amy and others on a class called Performing the Museum, which is taught in here and a little bit at the Hammer too, and a little bit in World Arts and Cultures, which really engage with, I suppose, not only how objects perform within the space of museums, but really also how artists and cultural producers and practitioners can perform with and between the spaces. And so I think, just as I was looking at the wonderful presentation, I think maybe one of the most interesting things is the space in between, the in-between space, and the potential and the speculative potential not only for students to work in that space digitally, between the object, between the digital, but also the diversity of voices that can be shown around each object, and the tension that each object holds, and very quickly you begin to see actually the object contains these kind of myriad contradictions, and it's all on show for us, and also in the space too, right? So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to return back to Chela and Tiffany's point about conservation science information. Being surprised sometimes how many people are really interested in that information. Like, we did a reinstallation of a South Asian collection, and we labeled text like what was conservation science information and what was historical information, and people really gravitated towards it. And then thinking about resources we already have, like the digitization of the Glatzer Gospel, which we did. It's the prize manuscript of UCLA Library that Chela knows very well, and I'm sure you have so much information about that manuscript that you've studied. Thinking about, like, okay, let me pause. Thinking about the various people who've worked on Armenian histories at UCLA, like Sebu Aslanian and Peter Cowie, the list goes on, and also using that manuscript for teaching language, right? So how do you learn classical Armenian and learn different scripts, for example, with that manuscript? So thanks for bringing up that point. And also I'd like to think also with the group in terms of how do you bring students, that Nathaniel and Tiffany also brought up, how do you bring students involved? Like, what do you think are the ways?
Well, I will just say that right now I'm teaching a class that's based on my first book, and it's a lot of material that the students haven't encountered before, which is, and also putting that material in places where they wouldn't normally expect it. Like art historians talking about Black feminist theory, to me that's every day, but they're like, what? I've never read Patricia Hill Collins. Oh my God. Right. So I had to walk back and create this keywords exercise that just brings them in. It's a peer-to-peer sharing that gets the conversation started at the beginning of class. It takes 10 minutes, and they're really into it. And I've been trying to figure out how to make that a more summative assessment for the end of the quarter. So either making a digital, a database or something kind of like this Vital Matters thing, which I obviously don't have the technological prowess to do, but the students do. So that's one thing, is they are already so much more knowledgeable about digital tools than I am. Sorry. I'm not their generation. I'm very pre-internet. So it's interesting to think about how to meet them where they are, and to also let them show me what they can do, and empowering them and emboldening them to do that freaks them out a little bit, but then they get really into it. So I'm just like, hey, we're doing these keyword things. What kind of assessment would you want this to turn into? And something like this, where it's I can model this, oh look, this Vital Matters platform, the Fowler Museum did this. What could we do with our keywords to model something like this? So I think just empowering them to be kind of leaders in their own knowledge production is one way.
Yeah, a glossary of
following up with.
Yeah, a glossary, something like that, a hyperlinked glossary, something that then you can scroll over and then it pops out. There's an object that pops out that correlates or something. I mean, it's very simple, but I think it would be very generative for particularly undergraduates.
No, please.
Yeah, just to continue, I think one of the things that happened in this classroom, I think Amy and Hannah, you were both there was a lot of kind of speculation on rearrangement or thinking about space and thinking through space. I'm thinking in particular of the Silver Room and engaging with those histories differently. And the students were really into it, such that we as educators got kicked out of the room because we were distracting them from their work. And so sometimes actually there's a moment halfway through classes, at least that I see, that they begin to see themselves, not whether as artists, writers, cultural practitioners, and they have the possibility of they see themselves in these positions in museums, and that is as a teacher kind of really you're like yes, fascinating. But B, I think if there is the possibility of participation in these platforms for students, whatever the platforms are, that then they'll be like, oh, my work lives outside of me, outside of the classroom, and other people outside of this peer group of 20, 30, 40 people are seeing it and engaging with it, then suddenly, and they do begin to build a portfolio in that way, particularly if the Fowler as a museum that does belong to UCLA, right, is part of the UCLA, and students are such the heartbeat of the UCLA community. I think there's just wonderful potential, and I kind of even see it just walking through that, like whether it's just the inclusion of their voices. I mean, they also made tours. Andrea Fraser inspired tours of the museum. That was fun. And if there's ways that what is the afterlife of all of this? You know, not only in their head but also kind of physically, and also the Fowler. How can the convergence of the classroom and the museum become a mutually nourishing space? Yeah, I see a lot of potential in that through kind of digital platforms.
We had one of Asma Saeed's students and Adina Lekovich's students as one of the knowledge producers for the Sheikh Hamadou Bamba doors, which worked out well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think students would get really excited about they could easily see like, oh, this is a product of my engagement with learning that is also a part of a career path. That's also all so it just is all. I mean, it's already built into the thing. And then the other thing I was going to say is I'm really happy that there's deep 3D modeling that's part of this, because there's so many objects. I mean, I'm like 1980s to present African American art. That's not even how I label myself, but for whatever reason, the department wants me to have that title as my professorial expertise. But so often in terms of arts of the African diaspora, there are objects that we can't touch that are in museum collections or archives that are kept away in storage that we don't have the opportunity to really look at, feel. And so the 3D modeling is like, oh, you can even see it in 3 dimensions, like turning it around in the technology. So I'm glad that that's here actually, because it's really useful for students to see an object in the round versus like a flat reproduction, which it never gives the details. It's always hard to teach from reproductions in class.
Like size too, right? Scale, like the size of an object, and one thing I should add is that the 3D models can also, we're using a platform that can also bring it into AR so that it could be sort of in the space as well. Right. And I think that's, as you're saying, it's that additional context that really can strike that learning moment epiphany.
And in terms of materiality, I mean, conservators are one voice, and conservation scientists, and actually I would argue collection care folks, registrars, those who do housekeeping, as it's so called in museums, also are voices that could be brought in very usefully to this. How in the world do I clean this? How do we move it? How do I store it? Natural curiosity, if people actually think about how did this get here and how does it, live through time. And I've seen it done digitally. LACMA's got a show up right now, We Live in Painting, where they've got the codices out, some of the Aztec codices. Well, yeah, they're both from the Bodleian, which there's a story there, but but it's you can go to the wall and drag something around. It doesn't work perfectly, but when you hover it over part of the manuscript, it will tell you, oh, this is indigo. Mm-hmm. this is what indigo is. This is how it's prepared in this manuscript. This is Mayan blue, and this is why Mayan blue is important. This is how that red was made. This is the, and even the kind of tool that was used to apply it, the kinds of techniques that were used to prepare the substrate for these accordion fold. It's often deerskin that's been processed a particular way with gesso on it, and there's just so much to unpack there. And digital, it's really easier to do, and if somebody can interact with the object, and then you can kind of put in either the voices of the conservator saying, yeah, I had to replace that. What you're seeing here is a replacement part, which people don't always know. Mm-hmm. If you could show, if you had a special magic wand for some paintings and objects to see how much of them are actually been restored and replaced, you would find out a lot. And that's not always shared. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And for students, I have to say that we're all talking digital, but if you have a teaching collection that people can handle, haptics, people, haptics. We need to learn with our hands. You're talking digitally here. And I'm continually saying, oh, can't you see me a video on how to handle that? I say, no, you actually can't understand that unless you actually touch it. But, so how do you, work with that or explain the difference? Because you're just seeing a third object, a fourth object, a fixed line. You're not seeing the object.
Yeah.
You're not. You're seeing something else. So anyway, that's I'll say it out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. I want to take we'll have one question from the audience before we. Yes, Judith, please.
I don't want to get into your analysis too much, but I'm sitting here wondering. I'm a practicing artist, and one of the ways I taught for 30 years at the University of Oklahoma. And one of the things that I found among my students, I was teaching art history, although I was a studio professor as well. I think that one of the things that is missing from this conversation is the good old-fashioned involvement of having a student do what he's looking at. It sounds a little young, I realize, like high school or elementary, but the example that I'm thinking of, for a while I was in the administration of Rush University in Chicago, which is a medical teaching institution. And I had a medical student come to my office one day and she said, I understand you're an artist. And I said, well, yeah, this is my day job. And she said, I love to draw, and I was wondering, would you ever teach a class? I said, is there any interest? I didn't know medical students were interested in creating art. She said, well, some of us were talking about it and just kind of a way to decompress and, from our program, etc. I wound up having several students come for an entire semester, not because they wanted to become great artists, but they felt that the act of learning to draw, just to draw, would make them see more as physicians. And I think that is very apropos to what the Fowler is wanting to do with this. It's one thing, to look at these things, even if you have this wonderful, all this new technology, which I also am not that great at. Thank God I've got a young one who does do that. But it's still one step away from, you exercising those kinds of muscles mentally, emotionally, about making or doing, replicating in some way the materials that you're looking at. So
yeah, we've been thinking about that too, because we have like a public program about dyeing and cochineal, and so how do you capture that as a public program and reuse that content, layer the object with information about cochineal from a science, conservation science perspective, and then also from a making perspective. Yeah.
Oh, please.
Can we respond?
Yes.
I was like, there are embodied people. No, they're just embodied people on the panel, so I thought maybe they wanted to say something. But thank you so much for this, because I also have a practice background. I don't have an MFA, but I have a BFA in dance, and so I came to art history through the back door, I like to say, and I was making dances, and then I was making exhibitions. I literally went I took the backward route to art history, and then ended up doing an interdisciplinary, non-traditional art history program. for my PhD. And so I'm kind of a weird kind of person in my department because I'm like, oh, nobody makes things. Oh, we don't do like, oh, okay, we just talk. Okay, cool. So I have my students, like the first day I have them dance and be silly and like build community, and then they are empowered to then later build that into a final project if they like. So a lot of students will come to take my class from outside of art history. So theater, I've had theater directors come and take my class. I've had musicologists. I've had MFA students in the art department, and I'm like, great, make something. I totally would accept that as a final project. Like, let's think through this together, and what kinds of ideas from the class you want to explore in this thing that you're going to make. The theater director student wrote a brilliant one act that was perfectly aligned with what we had, like the learning objectives of the class, and I was like, great. So I'm constantly trying to think about what is where can I engage them in the making and the doing as practicing the discipline, and then also looking at these tools like, oh, there's also another kind of production that can happen as you make and do that will also kind of have this other afterlife, but you can't get to that point until you actually make and do inside of the thing. So that's exactly how I teach. So I'm glad that you brought that up.